Chapter 51. Live on, do your karma. You want to enter Devagiri? Screeched Kritika. Are you mad? I will be back soon, Kritika, argued Virabhadra. There is no lawlessness in the city. You've seen the way the Meluhans are behaving. That may be so. But Vidyamayli's men will surely be prowling the streets. What do you think they're going to do? Welcome you with flowers? They will not notice me, Kritika. Nonsense. Most people in Devagiri recognize you as the Lord Nilkant's friend. They will recognize me only if they see me. It's late at night. I'm going to be hidden from view. Nobody will notice me. Why can't you send someone else? Because this is the least I can do for my friend. We need to find out who Princess Sati's actual killers are. Vidyamayli knows. He is the one who organized and implemented this peace farce. But we are destroying the entire city. All the conspirators will be dead in any case. Kritika, many of the killers got away, said Virabhadra. Except for Vidyamayli, nobody knows who they are. If we don't get to know their identities now, we will never know. Kritika looked away, having run out of arguments but still deeply troubled. I'm as angry as you are about Princess Sati's death. But the killing has to stop sometime. I have to go, Kritika. Virabhadra tried to kiss her goodbye but she turned her face away. He could understand her anger. She had lost the woman she had idolized all her life. Her hometown, Devagiri, was about to be destroyed. She did not want to risk losing her husband as well. But Virabhadra had to do this. Sati's killers had to be punished. Panditji, said Kartik, his hands folded in a namaste and his head bowed low. Bhrigu opened his eyes. The Maharishi had been meditating in the grand Indra temple, next to the public bath. Lord Kartik, said Bhrigu, surprised to see Kartik and Devagiri at this time of night. I'm too young for you to address me as Lord, great Maharishi, said Kartik. Noble deeds make a man a lord, not merely his age. I have heard about your efforts to ensure the Samras is not completely destroyed. History will thank you for it. Your glory will be recounted for ages. I'm not working for my own glory, Panditji. My task is to be true to my father's mission. My task is to do what my mother would have wanted me to do. Bhrigu smiled. I don't think your mother would have wanted you to come here. I don't think she would have wanted you to save me. I disagree, said Kartik. You are a good man. You just picked the wrong side. I didn't just pick this side, I led it into battle. And the dictates of Dharma demand that I perish with it. Why? If the side I led committed such crimes, I must pay for it. If fate has determined that those that supported the Samras have sinned, then the Samras must be evil. I was wrong. And, my punishment is death. Isn't that taking the easy way out? Bhrigu stared at Kartik, angered by the implied insult. So you think you have done something wrong, Panditji, said Kartik. What is the way out? Escaping through death? Or, actually working to set things right by balancing your karma? What can I do? I've conceded that the Samras is evil. There's nothing left for me to do. Now, you have a vast storehouse of knowledge within you, Panditji, said Kartik. The Samras is not the only subject you excel at. Should the world be deprived of Lord Bhrigu's Samhita? I don't think anyone is interested in my knowledge. That is for posterity to determine. You should only do your duty. Bhrigu fell silent. Panditji, your karma is to spread your knowledge throughout the world, said Kartik. Whether others choose to listen or not is their karma. Bhrigu shook his head as a wry smile softened his expression. You speak well, son of the Nilkanth. But I chose to support something that turned out to be evil. For this sin, I must die. There is no karma left for me in this life. I will have to wait to be born again. One cannot allow a bad deed to arrest the wheel of karma. Don't banish yourself from this world as a punishment for your sin. Instead, stay here and do some good, so that you can cleanse your karma. Brigu stared at Kartik silently. One cannot undo what has happened. But the inexorable march of time offers the wise opportunities for redemption. I entreat you, do not escape. Stay in this world and do your karma. Brigu smiled. You are very intelligent for such a young boy. I'm the son of Shiva and Sati, smiled Kartik. I am the younger brother of Ganesh. When the gardeners are good, the flower will bloom. Brigu turned towards the idol of Lord Indra within the Sanctum Sanctorum. The great god, the killer of the primal demon Vritara, stood resplendent as he held his favorite weapon, Vajra, the thunderbolt. Brigu folded his hands into a namaste and bowed, praying for the god's blessing. The Maharishi then turned back to Kartik and whispered, Samhita. The Brigu Samhita, said Kartik. The world will benefit from your vast knowledge. Panditji. Come with me. Don't sit here and wait for death. The sun rose on the day that would be Devagiri's last. The Pashupashastra was ready. After barring the gates, Shiva's soldiers had been asked to retreat beyond the safety line, out of the range of the expected radius of exposure. The relatives of those remaining within Devagiri too waited patiently, as they were herded back by Chandrakitu's Brangas. They kept up a constant prayer for the souls of their loved ones who were left behind in the city. Maharishi Brigu and another 300 people, who knew the secrets of the Samras, had been successfully spirited out of Devagiri the previous night. They were now kept imprisoned in a temporary stockade 10 kilometers north of Devagiri under the watchful eye of devotees and his soldiers. Kartik intended to wait for his father's anger to subside before talking to him about Brigu and the others. The peace conference building had been abandoned. Nandi and the other surviving bodyguards had been carefully evacuated onto Shiva's ship, where a medical team, under the supervision of Urvati, maintained a constant vigil. Urvati was worried about the blackish red mark on Shiva's brow. It had made its appearance many times before, especially when Shiva was angry. But very rarely had it stayed for so long. Shiva had brushed aside Urvati's concerns. Shiva, Kali, Ganesh and Kartik carried Sati's body gently to a specially prepared cabin on the ship. Her corpse was laid with great care within another tomb of ice. Shiva gently ran his hand across Sati's face and whispered, Devagiri will pay for its crimes, my love. You will be avenged. As Shiva stepped back, the soldiers placed another block of ice on top, enveloping Sati's body completely. Shiva, Kali, Ganesh and Kartik took one last look at Sati before turning around and walking out of the ship. Gopal and the kings in Shiva's army waited at the port. Shiva turned and nodded towards the ship captain. Soldiers marched into the rowing deck of the ship to row it back a fair distance down the Saraswati River, far away from the external blast radius of the Pashupashastra. The weapon is armed, Lord Nilkanth, said Tara. Shiva cast an expressionless look at an unhappy Gopal and then turned back towards Tara. Let's go. It was the 4th hour of the second prayer, just a couple of hours before Devagiri was to be destroyed. Virini knocked on Parvateshwar's door. There was no answer. Parvateshwar and an enemy were probably alone at home. Virini pushed open the door and stepped into the house. She walked past the lobby into the central courtyard. General, called out Virini. No response. General, said Virini again, a little louder this time. It is I, the Queen of Meluha. Your Highness. Virini glanced up to see a surprised Parvateshwar looking down from the balcony on the top floor. His hair was disheveled and an ankvistram had been hastily thrown over his shoulders. My apologies if I have come at a bad time, General. Not at all, Your Highness, said Parvateshwar. It's just that we don't have much time left, said Virini. There is something I needed to tell you. Please give me a moment, Your Highness. I'll be down shortly. Of course, said Virini. Virini walked into the large waiting room next to the courtyard, settled on a comfortable chair and waited. A few minutes later Parvati, clad in a spotless white dhoti and ankvistram, his hair neatly in place, walked into the room. Behind him was his wife, Anandami, also clad in white, the color of purity. Virini rose. Please accept my apologies for disturbing you. Not at all, Your Highness, said Parvati. Please be seated. Virini resumed her seat, as Parvati and Anandami sat next to her. What did you want to talk about, Your Highness? Asked Parvati. Virini seemed to hesitate. Then she looked at Anandami and Parvati with a smile. I wanted to thank you. Thank us? Asked a surprised Parvati, casting a look at Anandami before turning back to Virini. Thank us for what, Your Highness? For keeping the legacy of the Devagiri alive, said Virini. Parvati and Anandami remained silent, their expressions reflecting their confusion. Devagiri is not just a physical manifestation, said Virini, waving her hand around. Devagiri exists in its knowledge, its philosophies and its ideologies. You have managed to keep that alive by saving our intellectuals. An embarrassed Parvati didn't know how to react. How could he openly acknowledge having broken the law to save the scientists who worked at the Samras factory? Your Highness, I didn't. Virini raised her hand. Your conduct has been exemplary all your life, Lord Parvati. Don't spoil it by lying on your last day. Parvati smiled. The people of you have saved are not merely the repositories of the knowledge of Samras, but also of the accumulated knowledge of our great land. They are the custodians of our philosophies, of our ideologies. They will keep our legacy alive. For that, Devagiri and Meluha will forever be grateful to you. Thank you, Your Highness, said Anandami, accepting the gratitude on behalf of her discomforted husband. It's bad enough that the both of you are dying for my husband's sins, said Virini. It would have been really terrible had Maharishi Brigu and our intellectuals suffered for it as well. I think what's really unfair is your suffering for your husband's sins, Your Highness, said Anandami. Your husband may not have been a good emperor, but you have been an excellent queen. No, that's not true. If it were, I would have stood up to my husband instead of standing by him. They sat quietly together for a moment, then Virini straightened her shoulders and rose to leave. Time grows short, she said, and there are preparations we still have to make for our final journey. Thank you, both of you, and let us say our farewells. For one last time. Chapter 52. The Banyan Tree. Daksha sat quietly in his chamber, staring out of the window, waiting for his death. He looked towards the door, wondering where Virini had gone so early in the morning. Has she abandoned me as well? As death approached, he was honest enough at least with himself, to not blame her if she had. Daksha took a deep breath, wiped a tear and turned his gaze back at the window. Towards the banyan tree in the distance. It was a magnificent tree, centuries old, even older than Daksha. He had known this tree for as long as he could remember. He recalled its size when he was young and the fact that he always marveled at how the tree never seemed to stop growing. Its branches spread themselves out over vast distances, and when they extended too far, they dropped then reed-like roots into the ground. The drop roots then matured, anchoring themselves deep, drawing nourishment and growing enough in bulk to eventually resemble another trunk, thus supporting the further extension of the branch that gave them birth. After a few decades, there were so many new trunks that it was impossible to tell which the original one was. It had been a single tree when Daksha was born. It still was, but now it was so massive that it appeared like a jungle. Daksha knew all Indians looked upon the grand banyan tree with utmost respect and devotion. It was considered holy in India, a tree that unselfishly gave its all to others, building an ecosystem that sustained many birds and animals. Innumerable plants and shrubs found succor and shade under its protective cover. It remained firm and solid, even in the face of the most severe storm. Indians believed that ancestral spirits, even the gods, inhabited the banyan tree. For most citizens of Devagiri, this massive tree represented the ideal of life. They worshipped it. Daksha's perspective, though, was very different. At a very young age, he had noted that no offspring of a banyan was able to flourish, or even grow, around its parent. The roots of the tree were too strong, they twisted and pushed away any attempt by another banyan sapling to grow roots in the vicinity. For a young sapling to survive, it would have to move very far away from its parent. I should have run away. The banyan tree is pollinated by a particular species of wasp. But the tree extracts a terrible price from the tiny insect that aids its reproduction. It kills the wasp, kills it brutally, ripping the insect to shreds. Daksha's interpretation of this fact was very simple. The banyan hated its own progeny so much that it would murder the kindly wasp that trusts to bring its offspring to life. To a neglected child's imagination, the banyan tree's munificence was reserved for others. It did not care for its own. In fact, it went out of its way to harm its own. So while everyone else looks upon the banyan tree with reverential eyes, Daksha viewed it with fear and hatred. He was fearful because this was not the only banyan tree in his life. He had had another, his father. He hated his father with venomous intensity, but at a deeper level, perhaps loved and admired his abilities. Just like the desperate offspring of the banyan, he had always tried to prove that he could be as great as his father. He had carried this burden all his life. But there had been this one time when he had unshackled himself from his father's grip. When he had been free for a few magical moments. He remembered that day so clearly. It had been a long time ago, more than 100 years. Sati had just returned from the Mkugurukul, a headstrong, idealistic girl of 16. In keeping with her character, she had jumped in to save an immigrant woman from a vicious pack of wild dogs. Daksha remembered well that Parvateshwar and he had rushed into her rescue. He also remembered that, despite not being an accomplished warrior, he had, with Parvateshwar's help, courageously fought back the dogs that were out to kill his daughter. He had been seriously injured in that terrible fight. Fortunately, the medical teams had reached quickly. Parvateshwar and Sati's injuries were superficial and had been quickly dressed. Daksha knew that since he had been in the thick of the battle, his injuries were the most serious. The medical officers had decided to take him to the Urali so that senior doctors could examine him. However, due to massive blood loss, he had lost consciousness on the way. When he had regained consciousness, he had found himself in the Urali. He remembered that he'd scolded Sati for risking her own life to save an insignificant immigrant woman. Later, when recuperating in his room, he had asked Virini to bring Sati to him, in order to make peace with her now. But before Sati could be brought in, Daksha's father Brahmanayak had stormed into the chamber, accompanied by the doctor who had treated Daksha. Brahmanayak, being one of the foremost warriors in Meluha, had mocked Daksha about how he could have got himself so badly injured while fighting mere dogs. The doctor had pulled Brahmanayak out of the room using the excuse of a private conversation, wanting to save Daksha from any further mental anguish. As soon as Brahmanayak had left the room, Virini had repeated the plea she had made many times earlier, that they should escape from Meluha and live in Panchavati with both their daughters, Kali and Sati. Daksha, trust me, said Virini. We'll be happy in Panchavati. If there was any other place where we could live with both Kali and Sati, I'd suggest it. But there isn't. Maybe Virini's right. I can escape the old man. We can be happy. Also, Sati is the only pure one in my bloodline. Virini's corrupt soul has led to Kali's birth. It's difficult to help them. But I have to protect Sati from the terrible fate of seeing her father being insulted every day. My elder daughter is the only one worthy of my love. Daksha breathed deeply. But how? You leave that to me. I'll make the arrangements. Just say yes. Your father is leaving tomorrow for Kurakapa. You are not so badly injured that you can't travel. We'll be in Panchavati before he knows you're gone. Daksha stared at Virini. But trust me. Please trust me. It will be for our good. I know you love me. I know you love your daughters. Deep inside, I know you don't really care about anything else. Just trust me. Perhaps this is what we need. Daksha nodded. Virini smiled, bent close and kissed her husband. I'll make all the arrangements. Virini turned and walked out of the room. In this moment of solitude, Daksha glanced at the ceiling, feeling light and relaxed. Feeling free. Everything happens for a reason, perhaps even this battle with the dogs. We can be happy in Panchavati. We will be away from my father. We will be free of that monster. To hell with Meluha. To hell with the throne. I don't want any of it. I just want to be happy. I just want to be with my Sati and be able to take care of her. I will also look after Virini and Kali. Who do they have besides me? He noticed Virini's prayer beads on the chair. Next to the prayer beads was the tiger claw that Sati wore as a pendant. It must have fallen off during the battle with the dogs. And Virini must have recovered it to return it to their young daughter. Daksha stared at the blood stains on the tiger claw, his daughter's blood. His eyes became moist again. I will be nothing like my father. I'll take care of Sati. I will love her like every father should love his child. I will not ridicule her in public. I will not deride her for the qualities she doesn't possess. Instead, I will cherish everything that she does have. She will be free to live her own dreams. I will not force my dreams upon her. I will love her for who she is, not for what I'd like her to be. Daksha looked at his own injured body and shook his head. All of this to save an immigrant woman. Sati can be so naive at times. But she is a child. I shouldn't have screamed at her. I should have explained things calmly to her. After all, who does she have to look up to besides me? Just then the door opened and Sati walked in, looking grouchy, almost angry. Daksha smiled. She's only a child. Come here, my child, said Daksha. Sati stepped forward hesitantly. Come closer, Sati, laughed Daksha. I'm your father. I'm not going to eat you up. Sati stepped closer. But her face still reflected the righteous anger she felt within. Lord Ram, be merciful. This girl still thinks that she did the right thing in risking all our lives to save an unimportant immigrant woman. Daksha reached out and held Sati's hand, speaking patiently. My child, listen to me. I care for you. I only had your best interests at heart. It was stupid of you to risk your life for that immigrant. But I admit I shouldn't have shouted at. Daksha fell silent as the door swung open suddenly and Brahmanayak strode in. Sati suddenly withdrew her hand and turned around to look at Brahmanayak, her back towards her father. Ah! Said Brahmanayak as his face broke into a bored smile. He walked up to Sati and embraced her. At least one of my progeny has my blood coursing through her veins. Sati looked at Brahmanayak adoringly, pure hero worship in her eyes. Daksha stared at him with impotent rage. I've heard about what you did, said Brahmanayak to Sati. You risk your own life too. Protect a woman whom you didn't even know, a woman who was only a lowly immigrant. Sati smiled in embarrassment. It was nothing, Your Highness. Brahmin Nayak laughed softly and patted Sati's cheek. I am not Your Highness for you. Sati. I'm your grandfather. Sati nodded, smiling. I'm proud of you, my child, said Brahmin Nayak. I am honored to call you a Meluhan. Honored to call you my granddaughter. Sati's smile broadened as her heart felt light. She had done the right thing after all. She embraced her grandfather once again. Brahmin Nayak bent down and kissed his adolescent granddaughter on her forehead. He then turned to Daksha, the smile immediately disappearing from his face. With barely concealed contempt, he told his son, I'm leaving for Kurakapa tomorrow morning and will be gone for many weeks. Perhaps you will need that much time to recover from your so-called injuries. We'll talk about your future when I return. A seething Daksha refused to answer Brahmin Nayak, turning his face away. Brahmin Nayak shook his head and rolled his eyes. He then patted Sati on her head. I'll see you when I return, my child. Yes, grandfather. Brahmin Nayak opened the door and was gone. Daksha glared at the closed door. Thank God I'm going to be rid of you, you beast. Insulting me in front of my favorite daughter? How dare you? Take the throne away, take all the riches away, take the world away if you wish. But don't you dare take my good daughter away from me. She's mine. He looked at Sati's back. She was still staring at the door, her body shaking. Is she crying? Daksha thought that perhaps Sati was angry with Brahmin Nayak for insulting her father. She was his daughter after all. Daksha smiled. It's all right, my child. I'm not angry. Your grandfather doesn't matter anymore because... Father, interrupted Sati as she turned around, tears streaming down her cheeks. Why? Can't you be more like grandfather? Daksha stared at his daughter, dumbstruck. Why can't you be more like grandfather? Whispered Sati again. Daksha was in shock. Sati suddenly turned around and ran out of the room. Daksha kept staring at the door as it slammed shut behind Sati. Fierce tears were pouring from his eyes. More like grandfather? More like that monster? I am better than him. The gods know that. They know I will make a far better king. I will show you. You will love me. I am your creator. You will love me. Not him. Not that monster. The sound of the door being opened broke his train of thought, bringing Daksha back to the present from that ancient memory. He saw Virini walk into the bedchamber. She glanced at Daksha for an instant, then shook her head, walked up to her private desk and rummaged through it to find what she was looking for, her prayer beads. She brought them up to touch her forehead reverentially, then both her eyes and then her lips. She held the beads tightly and turned to take one last look at her husband. The disgust she felt couldn't be expressed in words. She had no intention of desecrating her ears by listening to his voice. She hadn't spoken to him since Sati's death. Daksha's eyes followed Virini's passage. He couldn't muster the courage to speak, even if it was only to apologize for all that he'd done. She walked into the private prayer room next to her bedchamber and shut the door. She bowed before the idol of Lord Ram, which was, as usual, surrounded by the idols of his favorite people, his wife, Lady Sita, his brother, Lord Lakshman and his loyal devotee, Lord Hanuman, the Vayuputra. Virini sat down cross-legged. She held the beads high, in front of her eyes and began chanting as she waited for her death. Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram. The faint echo of this chanting reached Daksha's ears. He stared at the closed door of the attached chamber, his angry wife closeted within. I should have listened to her. She was right all along. Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram. He continued to hear the soft chanting of his wife in the prayer room. Those divinely serene words should have brought him peace. But there was no chance of that. He would die a frustrated and angry man. Dakshal clenched his jaw and looked out of the window. He stared at the banyan tree in the distance, tears streaming down his face. Damn you! The banyan shook slightly and its leaves ruffled dramatically with a strong wind. It appeared as if the giant tree was laughing at him. Damn you! Chapter 53. The Destroyer of Evil. The wind is too strong, murmured a worried Tara, looking at the windsock that had been set up close to the Pashupashastra missile tower. Tara and Shiva were mounted on horses, stationed far from the Pashupashastra launch tower. It was almost the end of the second hour and the sun was just a few moments away from being directly overhead. Shiva's entire army and the refugees from Devagiri had been cordoned off 7 kilometers from the launch tower, safely outside the Pashupashastra's blast radius. Shiva glanced at Tara and then up at the sky, trying to judge the wind from the movement of dust particles. Not a problem. Saying this, Shiva's attention returned to stringing his bow. Parshhuram had been working on making this composite bow for months. Its basic structure was made of wood, reinforced with horn on the inside and sinew on the outside. It was also curved, much sharper than normal, with its edges turning away from the archer. Due to the mix of different elements and the curve at the edges, the bow had exceptional draw strength. For its small size, it was ideal for an archer to shoot arrows from, while riding a horse or a chariot. Parshhuram had named the bow Pinuka, after the fabled great ancient longbow of Lord Rayudra. Though Parshhuram didn't know this while designing the bow, the Pinuka would prove ideal for Shiva's purpose, as firing the Pashupashastra was not easy. The Pashupashastra was a pure nuclear fusion weapon, unlike the Brahmastra and the Vaishnavastra, which were nuclear fission weapons. In a pure nuclear fusion weapon, 2 paramanus, the smallest stable division of matter, are fused together to release tremendous destructive energy. In a nuclear fission weapon, anus, atomic particles, are broken down to release paramanus, and this is also accompanied by a demonic release of devastating energy. Nuclear fission weapons leave behind a trail of uncontrollable destruction, with radioactive waste spreading far and wide. A nuclear fusion weapon, on the other hand, is much more controlled, destroying only the targeted area with minimal radioactive spread. So the Pashupashastra would be the obvious weapon of choice for those who intended to destroy a specific target with the precision of a surgeon. The problem, though, was its launch. These Devyastras were usually mounted on launching towers, packed with a mixture of sulfur, charcoal, saltpeter and a few other materials which generated the explosive energy that propelled the Astra towards the target. Once the Astra was close to its target, another set of explosions would trigger the weapon. The launch material within the tower had to be triggered from a safe distance, or else the people firing the Astra would be incinerated in the initial launch explosion. Keeping this in mind, archers were called upon to shoot flaming arrows from a distance to trigger the launch explosion. These archers usually used longbows with a range of more than 800 meters. To hit a target accurately from this distance required archers of great skill. The Brahmastra and Vaishnavastra did not need a precise landing, as their destruction spread far and wide. Since accuracy was not of the essence, the launch towers that cradled these weapons had huge firing targets. The Pashupashastra, or weapon of the Lord of Animals, was a precise missile. It had to land at the exact spot. What complicated the issue even more at this particular time was that the attempt was to fire 3 missiles concurrently. The trajectory of the 3 missiles had been planned such that they would detonate over the Svarna, Rajat and Tamara platforms of the Evagiri simultaneously, guaranteeing the complete and instantaneous destruction of the entire city. The risk with trying to destroy 3 platforms at the same time was that the inner circle of devastation would expand, since the weapons would have to be triggered from a greater height. Tara had planned the angles of descent of each missile such that, together, their simultaneous explosions would ensure the annihilation of Devagiri while their excess energies would be trapped within each other, thus preventing any fallout destruction outside the inner circle. A precise descent needed a perfect takeoff. Therefore, the Pasha-Shastra missiles had been set at precise angles within the tower. The target area on the tower where the fiery arrow would be shot was small. Shiva had to fire an arrow to hit the target, placed more than 800 meters away. Moreover, he had to do this while seated on a horse, so that he could escape immediately after firing the arrow. "Remember, Great Nilkanth," said Tara, "the moment your arrow hits the target, you have to right away. You will have less than 5 minutes before the Pasha-Shastra explodes over Devagiri. You have to cover at least 3 kilometers within that time. Only then will you be out of the range of the minuscule number of neutrons from the Pasha-Shastra which may escape that far." Shiva nodded distractedly, still testing his bow's draw strength. "Nilkanth? It is crucial for you to ride as fast as you can. The blast can be fatal." Shiva didn't respond. He pulled out the arrows from the quiver. He smelt them and then rubbed the tip of one of the arrows against the rough leather of the pommel. The tip immediately caught fire. "Perfect." Shiva threw the burning arrow away and returned the rest to the quiver. "Did you hear me? You need to move away immediately." Shiva wiped his hand on his dhoti and turned to Tara. "Ride beyond the safety line. Now." "Shiva. You shoot the arrow and move." Shiva looked at Tara, his gaze glassy. Tara could see the blackish red blotch on his brow throbbing frantically. "You will ride away immediately," emphasized Tara. "Promise me." Shiva nodded. "Promise me." "I have already promised you. Now go." Tara stared at Shiva. "Nilkanth." "Go, Tara. The sun is about to reach overhead. I need to fire the missiles." Tara pulled her horse's reins and spun it around. "Tara." Tara pulled up her horse and looked back over her shoulder. "Thank you," said Shiva. Tara was still, watching the face of the Nilkanth with clouded eyes. "Ride back quickly. Beyond the safety line. Remember, all those who love you are waiting for you." Shiva held his breath. "Yes, my love is waiting for me." Tara kicked her horse into action and rode away. Shiva pressed his forehead, right above the blackish red mark. The pressure seemed to ease the horrendous burning sensation. The pain had been immense and continuous. For the last few days, ever since he had seen Sati's body. Shiva shook his head and focused his attention on the tower. He could see the target in the distance. It had been marked a bright red. He took a deep breath and looked towards the ground. "Holy Lake, give me strength." Shiva breathed once again and looked up. "Lord Ram, be merciful." Arrayed in front of him was an army of clones, blocking his view of the Pasha-Shastra launch tower, clones of the giant hairy monster who had tormented him in his nightmares since his childhood. Shiva looked carefully and noticed that none of the monsters had faces. There was a smooth, white slate where their faces should have been. All of them had their swords drawn, blood dripping from every single blade. He could clearly hear their ghastly roar. For a moment Shiva imagined he was a terrified little boy once again. Shiva looked up at the sky and shook his head, as if to clear it. "Help me." Shiva heard his uncle Manabu's voice call out. "Forgive them. Forget them. Your only true enemy is evil." Shiva brought his eyes down and locked his gaze on the launch tower. The monsters had disappeared. He stared directly at the red spot, right at the center of the tower. Shiva pulled his horse's reins and turned it right, singing softly in its ear to calm it down. The horse stayed still, offering Shiva the stable base he needed to hit a target. He turned his head to his left, creating the natural angle for a right-handed archer to get a straight shot. He pulled his bow forward and tested the string once again. He liked the twang of the bowstring when it was pulled and released rapidly. It was as taut as it could be. He bent forward and pulled an arrow from the quiver. He held it to his side and looked up, judging the wind. The art of shooting arrows from this huge distance was all about patience and judgment. It was about waiting for the right wind conditions, the ability to judge the parabolic movement of the arrow, determining the ideal angle of release, controlling the speed of the arrow at release, deciding the extent to which the string should be pulled. Shiva kept his eyes fixed on the windsock, keeping his breathing steady, trying to ignore the burning sensation between his eyes. The wind is changing direction. Pointing the bow towards the ground, Shiva knocked an arrow, the shaft firmly gripped between his hooked index and middle finger. The wind is holding. He ignited the tip by rubbing it against the leather pommel. Taut muscles raised the bow and drew the string in one fluid motion, even as his warrior mind instinctively calculated the correct angle of flight. Master archer that he was, he kept his dominant eye focused on the target. His left hand held the bow rock steady, ignoring the searing heat from the tip of the arrow. The wind is perfect. He released the arrow without hesitation. He saw the arrow move in a parabola, as if in slow motion. His eyes followed its path till it hit the red target, depressing it with its force. The fire immediately spread to the waiting receptacle behind the target. The Pashapayshastra's initial launch had been triggered. Right away! Screamed Air from the distance. "Bubba, turn your horse around!" shouted Kartik. But Shiva could not hear either of them. They were too far away. Shiva kept staring at the rapidly spreading fire behind the target, the pain within his brow ratcheting up once again. He felt as if the insides of his forehead were on fire as well, just like the launch tower. He pulled the reins of his horse and turned it around. He could see his troops far away. Beyond them, he could see his ship, anchored on the Saraswati. Sati's body was stored in there. "She's waiting for me." Shiva kicked his horse. The animal didn't need much coaxing as it quickly broke into a gallop. The fire within the launch tower finally triggered the initial explosion. The three Pashapaishastras shot out of their pods, the two that were directed at the Tamra and Swarna platforms taking off just a few milliseconds after the third. That was because the target of the third missile, the Rajat platform, was farther away. Shiva kept kicking his horse as it galloped faster and faster. He was just a few seconds away from the safety line. The missiles flew in a great arc, leaving a trail of fire behind them. Seconds later, they began their simultaneous descent into the city, like giant harbingers of absolute destruction. Zhiva. Shiva could have sworn he heard the voice that he loved beyond all reason. But it couldn't have been for real. He kept riding on. The Pashapaishastra missiles were descending rapidly. Zhiva. Shiva. Shiva looked back. A bloodied and mutilated Sati was running after him. Her left hand was spewing blood in bursts, in tune with each beat of her pounding heart. Two massive wounds on her abdomen gaped open as blood streamed out from them in a torrent. Her left eye was gouged out. Her burn scar seemed like it was on fire once again. She was struggling desperately, but she kept running towards Shiva. Zhiva. Help me. Don't leave me. An army of soldiers chased Sati, holding bloody swords aloft. Each warrior was the exact likeness of Daksha. The area between Shiva's brows began throbbing even more desperately. The fire within was struggling to burst through. "Sati!" screamed Shiva, as he pulled the reins of his horse. He was not going to lose her again. The horse balked at Shiva's anxious command and refused to slow down. Sati! Shiva desperately yanked at the reins. But the horse had a mind of its own. He was not going to either slow down or turn. The beast could sense the stench of death behind it. Shiva pulled both his feet out of the stirrups and jumped to the ground, the speed of his fall making him lurch dangerously. He rolled quickly and was up on his feet in a flash. Sati! The horse kept galloping ahead towards the safety line as Shiva turned around, drew his sword and ran to protect the mirage of his wife. "Baba!" shouted Ganesh. "Come back!" The blackish-red mark at the center of Shiva's forehead burst open and blood spewed out. He ran desperately towards his wife, roaring at the army of Dakshas who chased her. "Leave her alone, you bastards! Fight me!" The 3 Pashupashastra missiles simultaneously exploded as planned, some 50 meters above the 3 platforms. A blinding burst of light erupted. Shiva's army and the Devagiri refugees shielded their eyes, only to be stunned by what they saw of their own bodies. Glowing and translucent, blood, muscle and even bone were visible. They even saw a demonic flash within their bodies, an echo of the devastating blasts over Devagiri. Sheer terror entered their hearts. Almost immediately thereafter, 3 bursts of satanic fire descended from the heights where the 3 Pashupashastras had exploded. They tore into Devagiri fiendishly, instantaneously incinerating all 3 platforms. The great city of the gods, built and nurtured over centuries, was reduced to nothingness in a fraction of a second. "Lord Ram, be merciful," whispered Yurvati in absolute horror as she saw the massive explosion from aboard the ship that was carrying Sati. As the fire ripped through Devagiri, giant pillars of smoke shot up from the site of the explosions. As Tara had predicted, the energy blasts of the 3 missiles seemed to attract each other. All the 3 pillars of smoke crashed into each other with diabolical rage, as thunder and lightning cracked through the destructive field. The unified pillar of smoke now shot higher, higher than anything that any living creature watching the explosion had ever seen. The smoke column rose like a giant and steeply inclined pyramid, and then it exploded into a massive cloud about 1 kilometer high in the air. And just as instantaneously, the pyramid of smoke collapsed into itself, closeted permanently within the ruins of Devagiri. Shiva, unmindful of the terrible devastation taking place in front of him, kept running forward, his sword drawn, his brow spouting blood at an alarming rate. As soon as the pyramid of smoke collapsed, another silent blast occurred. As this blast of neutrons raced out, the sound of the initial explosion reached Shiva's army cowering behind the safety line. "Baba!" screamed Ganesh, as he jumped from the platform he was on and raced towards his horse. The neutron blast was invisible. Shiva couldn't see it. But he could feel a demonic surge rolling towards him. He had to save his wife. He kept running forward, screaming desperately. "Sati!" His body was lifted high by the neutron blast wave. For a moment he felt weightless. And then the wave propelled him back brutally. His brow and throat were on fire, while blood spewed out from his mouth. He landed hard on the ground, flat on his back, his head jerking as he felt a sharp sensation on the crown of his head. And yet, he felt no pain. He just kept screaming. T. T. Suddenly, he saw Sati bending over him. There was no blood on her. No wounds. No scars. She looked just like she had on the day he'd met her, all those years ago at the Brahma temple. She bent forward and ran her hand along Shiva's face, her smiling visage suffused with love and joy, a smile that always set the world right for him. She touched the crown of Shiva's head. The sharp sensation receded and was replaced by a calm that was difficult to describe. He felt like he had been set free. Strangely, His blue throat was not cold anymore. Equally strange was the realization that his brow had stopped burning from within. Shiva opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. So he thought of what he wanted to say. "Take me with you, Sati. There's nothing left for me to do. I'm done." Sati bent forward and kissed Shiva lightly on his lips. She smiled and whispered, "No. You are not done yet. Not yet." Shiva kept staring at his wife. "I can't live without you." "You must," said Sati's shimmering image. Shiva couldn't keep his eyes open anymore. Sati's beautiful and calm face began to blur. He collapsed into a peaceful dream-like state. As he was descending the depths of consciousness though, he thought he heard a voice, almost like a command. "No more killing from now on. Spread life. Spread life." Chapter 54. By the Holy Lake. 30 years later, Mansarovar Lake, at the foot of Mount Kailash, Tibet. Shiva squatted on the rock that extended over the Mansarovar. Behind him was the Kailash mountain, each of its four sides perfectly aligned with the four cardinal directions. It stood sentinel over the great Mahadev, the one who had saved India from evil. The long years and the tough Tibetan terrain had taken its toll on his body. His matted hair had grayed considerably, though it was still long and wiry enough to be tied in a traditional bun with beads. His body, honed with regular exercise and yoga, was still taut and muscular, but the skin had wrinkled and lost its tone. His Neelkanth, the blue throat had not lost color at all over the years. But it didn't feel cold anymore. Not since the day he had been hit by the neutron blast from the Pashupashastra that had destroyed Devagiri. The area between his brows didn't burn or throb either, perhaps also due to the neutron blast. But it had taken on a darker hue, almost black, that contrasted sharply with his fair skin. It wasn't an indistinct, indeterminate mark either. It looked like the tattoo of an eye with the lids shut. Kali had named it Shiva's third eye, which stood vertical on his forehead, between his natural eyes. Shiva looked across the lake at the setting sun. In the distance he spotted a pair of swans gliding over the shimmering waters. It appeared to Shiva as if the birds beheld the sight together. The setting sun cannot be enjoyed unless shared with the one you love. He breathed deeply and picked up a pebble. When he was young, he could throw one such that it skipped off the surface of the lake. His record had been 17 bounces. He flung the pebble, but he failed. It sank immediately into the lake with a plop. "I miss you." Not a day passed in his life without his mind dwelling on his wife. He wiped a tear from his eye before turning back to look at the bonfires outside his village compound. A large crowd had gathered around the fires, eating, drinking and making merry. Some members of his Guna tribe had followed him when he had returned to Kailash mountain many years ago. In addition, nearly 10,000 people from across India had decided to leave their homes and migrate to the homeland of their Mahadev chief. Amongst them were Nandi, Brahaspati, Tara, Parshuram, and Yurvati. The deposed Adian ruler, Dilipa, who was still alive thanks to Yurvati's medicines, former Mkolathal Governor Chinardwaj and former Naga Prime Minister Karkotak had also migrated to the shores of the Mansarovar. Shiva's followers had established new villages in close proximity to his. Seeing the massive contingent Shiva now commanded, even the Pakritis, the local Tibetans who had maintained the long-standing enmity with the Gunas, had made peace with the Neelkanth. The fires reminded Shiva of one of the worst days of his life, the day he had destroyed Devagiri. Sati had been cremated on the same day, later on in the evening. But Shiva did not have memories of that event. He had been unconscious, having been battered by the neutron blast of the Pashupashastra. He had been fighting for his life under Yurvati's care. What he knew about Sati's cremation was from what Kali, Ganesh and Kartik had told him. He had been told that a calm breeze had blown across the land, picking up the ashes from the ruins of Devagiri and scattering them around slowly. It was almost as if the ashes were trying to reach the waters of the Saraswati, to give some closure to the souls of the departed. Hazy specks had colored the entire landscape around the Saraswati to a pale shade of grey. The sandalwood pyre, lit by both Ganesh and Kartik, had taken some time to light, but once it did, it had raged like an inferno. It seemed as if even Lord Agni, the god of fire, needed some coaxing to consume the body of the former princess of Meluha. But once the task had begun, it must have been so painful for Lord Agni that he wanted to finish it as soon as possible. Shiva had regained consciousness 3 days later, to find an anxiety-filled gathering of Kali, Ganesh and Kartik sitting next to him. After he had regained his strength, a tearful Ganesh had handed him an urn containing Sati's ashes. A few drops of water splashed on Shiva, perhaps from a fish swimming vigorously below. They pulled him back from the 30-year-old memory to the present. Shiva tarried for some more time, allowing his gaze to dwell on the lake waters. As always, he could have sworn that he saw Sati's ashes swirling in it. Of course, it was a mirage. Her ashes had been immersed in the holy Saraswati, a day after Shiva had regained consciousness. He remembered struggling weakly onto the boat 30 years ago, helped by Ganesh and Kartik. The Nilkants had been rowed to the middle of the river, where Kali and he had jointly scattered some of Sati's ashes into the water. Shiva had refused to immerse all of it, regardless of what tradition held. He needed to keep some portion of Sati for himself. Indians believe that the body is a temporary gift from Mother Earth. She lends it to a living being so that one's soul has an instrument with which to carry out its karma. Once the soul's karma is done, the body must be returned, in a pure form, so that the mother may use it for another purpose. The ashes represent a human body that has been purified by the greatest purifier of them all, Lord Agni, the god of fire. By immersing the ashes into holy waters, the body is offered back, with respect, to Mother Earth. He recalled the Brahmins in an adjacent boat, chanting Sanskrit hymns throughout the ceremony. One specific chant from the Ishavas Upanishad had caught Shiva's attention and had been committed to memory. Vayuranidamamritam, Adidam Basmandam Shariram. Let this temporary body be burned to ashes. But the breath of life belongs elsewhere. May it find its way back to the immortal breath. My lord! Shouted Nandi loudly. Shiva turned to see Nandi standing at a distance, 2 hooks where his arms used to be. My lord, everyone is waiting, said Nandi, keeping his voice loud enough to reach his ears. Shiva held his hand up, signaling for Nandi to wait. He needed some more time with his memories. They had sent Nandi to call him as they knew that he had become Shiva's favorite. He had fought bravely alongside Sati 30 years ago, losing both his hands in his doomed attempt to save Shiva's wife. Shiva glanced beyond Nandi and saw Maharishi Bhrigu, sitting away from the others, talking to Ganesh and Kartik. The sage seemed to be explaining something from a palm leaf book. Both his sons listened attentively. Chandrakatu, the king of Branga and Mentli, the king of Vaishli, were also listening intently to Maharishi Bhrigu. He looked back towards the lake and took another deep breath. Kartik saved my honor. Kartik had chosen the moment wisely to tell Shiva how he had saved the Devagiri scientists who had the knowledge of the Samras. The Nilkants had received the news with equanimity. Shiva was also happy that Bhrigu had been saved, as the great Maharishi had had no role to play in Sati's death. Furthermore, the India of the future would be the proud inheritor of the legacy of his immense knowledge. Shiva had decreed that the Samras scientists be given lands in central Tibet, far beyond the expanse of Indian empires, in fact, beyond the reach of any empire. The Samra scientists had established their home with the help of Suryavanshi and Chandravanshi troops. These survivors named their new dwelling place after their original city, Devagiri, the abode of the gods. This new city established in Tibet was given a name with the same meaning, albeit in the local Tibetan language, Lhasa. The knowledge of the Samras, the elixir of immortality, was to be the sacred secret of the citizens of Lhasa, till such a time as India needed that knowledge again. Shiva had also decreed that his 2 sons would set up the tribe that would protect Lhasa. The tribe that Ganesh and Kartik established was drawn from an eclectic mix of Chandravanshas, Suryavanshas, and Nagas. They had also inducted most of the Gunas, Shiva's tribesmen, and many other local Tibetan tribes. Vayupatra, Shiva's friend and loyal follower, was appointed chief of this tribe. He was given the title of Lama, the Tibetan word for guru or master. The people of Lhasa and the followers of the Lama would protect India's ancient knowledge. Their sworn duty was to rise up and save India whenever it faced the onslaught of evil again. The Samras waste dump site that had been set up in Tibet, on the Tsingpo River, was dug out and its contents were removed. This waste was taken farther north, into an inhospitable, remote and mostly uninhabited part of the Tibetan plateau. It was buried there, deep into the ground, enclosed within sludgy cases made of wet clay and bilva leaves, which were further encased within boxes of thick lead. These boxes had been buried deep under vast quantities of earth, snow and permafrost. It was hoped that this poison would remain undisturbed forever. Fortunately, there would be no new toxic waste to be taken care of since the manufacturing of Samras had stopped with the destruction of Devagiri. Shiva had also realized that, just removing the knowledge of the Samras was not enough to stop the drink of the gods. If it had to be wiped out from India, its very foundation needed uprooting. In that sense, the idea that Parshhuram had was sound. Without the Saraswati, the Samras couldn't be manufactured. Furthermore, the river's present course was picking up radioactive waste at Devagiri and poisoning the lands farther downstream. The Saraswati emerged from the confluence of the Sutlej and the Yamuna. If these 2 tributaries were separated, the Saraswati water itself would not be available for the manufacture of the Samras or for picking up radioactive waste. Shiva had decided that, in the interest of India, the Sutlej and the Yamuna would part company forever. It was decreed that the Yamuna's course would be changed once again, back to the temporary course that it had taken more than a century before the destruction of Devagiri, when it had merged into the Ganga. But this was easier said than done. If the course of a river as mighty as the Yamuna was changed suddenly, the resultant flooding would cause havoc. The change had to be controlled. Bhagat, with the help of Meluhan engineers, had come up with a brilliant plan. The sides of the Yamuna were dug up and giant sluice gates were built along them. These gates, serving as locks, would be opened slowly to guide the Yamuna onto its new course in a deliberate and controlled manner, over many months. Bhagat had named these sluice gates the locks of Shiva. The Yamuna was thus slowly diverted onto its new course, to unite with the Ganga at Prayag. The locks of Shiva had thereby allowed the Ganga to take its new form, gradually, without the chaos of an uncontrolled flood. The addition of the massive Yamuna, along with the already worthy presence of the enormous Brahmaputra, had enhanced the mighty Ganga into the biggest river system in India. It also came to be believed that the Yamuna carried the soul of the Saraswati into the Ganga, thus transforming it into the holiest river in India. In a sense, the devotion associated with the hallowed river Saraswati had been transferred onto the Ganga. Furthermore, The burst of fresh clean water from the Yamuna had cleansed the poisonous waters in Branka, freeing the great rivers in that land of the Samras poisoned. The Brangas living at Gangaskar, the place where the resurgent Ganga met the sea, began to believe in a legend over time, that the Ganga had purified their land. It was a myth that was not far from the truth. Meluha, without the centralizing presence of Devagiri, had devolved into its different provinces which became independent kingdoms. Without the incompetent rule of Daksha and with the fresh breath of freedom, there had been a burst of creativity and an efflorescence of varied but equally beautiful cultures. Shiva heard a loud laugh, which he knew could belong only to Bhagat. He turned and looked at him, standing near a bonfire, talking animatedly to Gopal and Kali. Dileepa had been deposed by his army before the destruction of Devagiri. He was succeeded by Bhagat, who had ruled Ayodhya wisely, heralding a new era of peace and prosperity. Judging by the expression on Dileepa's face as he stood close to Bhagat, the former emperor seemed to have made peace with his fate. Shiva turned his attention to the tall, lanky figure speaking with Bhagat and Kali. The great Vasudev perhaps sensed that somebody was looking at him. He turned to look at Shiva, smiled, folded his hands into a namaste and bowed low. Shiva returned Gopal's greeting with a formal namaste. Gopal had made his peace with Shiva. The outcome at Devagiri was certainly not what the Vasudev chief had desired. But what had given him peace was the realization that evil had been removed and the knowledge of the Samras saved. India had rejuvenated itself as the malevolent effects of evil were removed. The Nilkanth had succeeded in his mission, and in that lay the success of the Vasudevs. Gopal had also established formal relations with Vibhadra and the citizens of Lhasa, the new tribe of the Mahadev. The Vasudevs and the Lasans would maintain their watch over India in tandem, ensuring that this divine land continued to prosper and grow with balance. Seeing his friend Gopal also reminded Shiva of the Vayuputras. They had never forgiven Shiva for having used the Pashupat Shastra. It had been a source of particular embarrassment for the Mitra since he had personally backed the announcement of Shiva as the Nilkanth, against some virulent opposition. The punishment for the unauthorized use of a Devyastra was a 14-year exile. As a form of atonement for breaking his word to them, and for having been the cause of the death of his mother-in-law Virini and his friends Parvateshwar and Anandami, Shiva had punished himself with exile from India, not just for 14 years, but for the entire duration of his remaining life. Baba. Shiva hadn't noticed Ganesh, Kartik and Kali sneak up on him. Yes, Ganesh? Baba, it's the feast of the night of the Mahadev, said Ganesh. And the Mahadev needs to be a part of the celebration instead of brooding next to the lake. Shiva nodded slowly. His neck had begun to hurt a bit, the perils of old age. Help me up, said Shiva, as he made an effort to rise. Kartik and Ganesh immediately leaned forward, helping their father to his feet. Ganesh, you get fatter every time I see you. Ganesh laughed heartily. He had suffered intensely and taken a long time to recover from his mother's death, but had ultimately reconciled himself with that loss, choosing to learn from her life instead. He had taken it upon himself to spread the word of Shiva and Sati throughout India. That sense of purpose in his life had helped him return to his calm state of being. In fact, he was even jovial at times. Thanks to your wisdom, peace prevails all over India, Baba, said Ganesh. There are no more wars, no conflicts. So I do very little physical activity and eat a lot. Ultimately, the way I see it, it's your fault that I'm getting fatter. Kali and Kartik laughed loudly. Shiva nodded faintly, his eyes not losing their seriousness. You should smile sometimes, Baba, said Kartik. It will make us happy. Shiva stared at Kartik. It had been a long time since Sati's death, and even young Kartik was now beginning to acquire a smattering of white hair. Shiva knew that Kartik had traveled a very long distance to come to Kailash. After most of Shiva's tasks had been completed and he had decided to return to Kailash Mansarovar, Kartik had migrated to the south of the Narmada, going deep into the ancient heartland of India, the land of Lord Manu. History had recorded that Lord Manu was a prince of the Pandya dynasty. This dynasty had ruled the prehistoric land of Sangamtama. That nation and its fine Sangam culture had been destroyed as sea levels had risen with the end of the last ice age. Kartik had discovered that many people continued to live in this ancient Indian fatherland, breaking Lord Manu's law that banned people from traveling south of the Narmada. Kartik had established a new Sangam culture on the banks of the southernmost major river of India, the Kaveri. "I will smile when the three of you will reveal your secret," said Shiva. "What secret?" asked Kartik. "You know what I'm talking about." Shiva did discover in due course that on the night before the destruction of Devagiri, Kali, Parashuram and Virabhadra had kidnapped Vidyanmali. Under pain of vicious torture, Vidyanmali had revealed the names of Sati's assassins. He had been tormented with a brutal and slow death. A few years after the destruction of Devagiri, Kali, Ganesh, Kartik, Parashuram and Virabhadra had slipped out of India. Nobody really knew where they had disappeared. They had consistently refused to tell Shiva, perhaps because he had prohibited any further reprisals for Sati's death. But Shiva had his suspicions. Those suspicions were not unfounded, because around the same time, rumors had arisen in Egypt about the near complete destruction of the secretive tribe of Aden. It was said that the death of each of the tribe's leaders had been long, slow and painful, their blood-curdling screams echoing through the hearts of their followers. What Kali and the rest didn't know was that a few months earlier Swath had exiled himself. He had gone south, to the source of the Nile River, and had spent the rest of his years bemoaning the fact that he had been unable to complete his holy duty of executing the final kill. But the magnificence of Sati had been branded upon his soul. He didn't know her name. So he worshipped her as a nameless goddess till his last days. His descendants continued the tradition. The few remaining survivors of the tribe of Aden would have to wait for centuries before a revolutionary pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, reformed and revived the cult. That pharaoh would be remembered as the great Akhenaten, the living spirit of Aten. But that is another story. Baba, we had gone to. Kali placed her hand on Kartik's lips. "There's nothing to reveal, Shiva. Except that the food is extremely delicious. You need to eat. So follow me." Shiva shook his head. "You still haven't lost your regal airs." Kali didn't have a kingdom anymore. Within a few years of her return from Egypt, she had renounced her throne and supported the election of Suparna as the new queen of the Nagas. Leaving her kingdom in capable hands, Kali, accompanied by Shiva, Ganesh and Kartik, had toured the land of India. The family of the Nilkanth had established 51 Shakti temples across the length and breadth of the country. Kali had also convinced Shiva to part with a portion of Sati's ashes that he had kept for himself. She had told him that Sati belonged to the whole of India and not just to Shiva. Therefore, small portions of Sati's ashes were consecrated at each of these 51 temples so that Indians would forever remember their great goddess. Lady Sati. Kali had finally settled down in northeastern Branka, close to the Kamakya temple, and devoted her life to prayer. Her spiritual presence had made the Kamakya temple one of the foremost Shakti temples in India. Many Suryavanshis, Chandravanshis and Nagas who were inspired by the Naga queen, had followed her to her new abode. Over time, they set up their own individual kingdoms. The Suryavanshis had named their kingdom Tripura, the land of the three cities, after the 3 platforms of their destroyed capital. The Chandravanshas, worshippers of the 7th Vishnu, Lord Ram, had called their land Manipur, the land of the jewel, for the 7th Vishnu was, no doubt, a crown jewel of India. Many of Kali's Naga followers established throne empire farther to the east. All of these different peoples followed the path of Kali, proud warriors forged from the womb of Mother India. Therefore, if treated with respect, these people would be your greatest strength. If you disrespected them, then no power on earth would be able to save you. I may not have a kingdom anymore, Shiva, said Kali, her eyes dancing with mirth, but I will always be a queen. Ganesh and Kartik smiled broadly. Shiva just stared at Kali's face, a splitting image of Sati's. It reminded him of how happy his life had once been. Come, let's go eat, said Shiva. As the family of the Mahadev walked back towards the bonfires, Ganesh and Kartik started speaking to Shiva about the brilliant composition that Brigu had just shown them. It would be known over the millennia as the greatest classic on the ancient science of astrology, the Brigu Samhita. Over the subsequent years, Shiva became increasingly ascetic. He began spending many days, even months, in isolation within the claustrophobic confines of mountain caves, performing severe penance. The only one allowed to meet him at such times was Nandi. Legends emerged that the only way to reach Shiva's ears was through Nandi. Shiva also devoted long hours to the study of yoga. The knowledge that he developed helped create a powerful tool for finding physical, mental and spiritual peace through unity with the divine. Shiva also added many fresh thoughts and philosophies to the immense body of ancient Indian knowledge and wisdom. Many of his ideas were captured in the holy scriptures of the Vedas, Upanishads and the Puranas, benefiting humanity for millennia. Notwithstanding the prodigious productivity of Shiva's mind, his heart never really found happiness ever again. Legend has it that despite repeated attempts by his family, nobody ever saw Shiva smile again after that terrible day in Devagiri. Nobody saw his ethereal dances or heard his soulful singing and music again. Shiva had given up everything that offered even a remote possibility of bringing him happiness. But legends also hold that Shiva did smile once, just once, only a moment before he was to leave his mortal body to merge once again with the god whom he had emerged from. He smiled, for he knew that the love of his life, his Sati, was just one last breath away. Kartik's wisdom and courage ensured that the Sangam culture in South India continued to flourish and its power spread far and wide. While Kartik continued to be adored in northern India, especially in Kashi where he was born, his influence in southern India was beyond compare. He is remembered to this day as the warrior god, the one who can solve any problem and defeat any enemy. Meanwhile, the adoration for Kartik's elder brother, the wise and kind-hearted Ganesh, grew to astronomical heights in India. People revered him as a living god. A belief spread throughout the country that he should be the first god to be worshipped in all ceremonies, before all others. It was held that worshipping Ganesh would remove all obstacles from one's path. Thus, he came to be known as the god of auspicious beginnings. His profound intellect also led to him gradually becoming the god of writers, thus his name acquired immense significance for authors, poets and other troubled souls. The Samras had had an especially strong effect on Ganesh, so he lived for centuries beyond all his contemporaries. And Ganesh did not mind this. He loved interacting with people from across India, helping them, guiding them. But there did come a time when, enfeebled by old age, Ganesh began to think that perhaps he had lived in this mortal body for too long. For he would have to suffer the mortification of seeing the ancient Vedic Indians turn on each other in a catastrophic civil war, a minor dispute within a dysfunctional royal family, escalated into a mighty conflict which sucked in all the great powers of the day. The calamitous bloodletting in that war destroyed not just all the powerful empires of the time but also the way of life of the ancient Vedic Indians. What was left behind was utter devastation. From these ruins, as is its wont, civilization did rise again. But this new culture had lost too much. They knew only snippets of the greatness of their ancestors. The descendants were, in many ways, unworthy. These descendants beheld gods in what were great men of the past, for they believed that such great men couldn't possibly have existed in reality. These descendants saw magic in what was brilliant science, for their limited intellect could not understand that great knowledge. These descendants retained only rituals of what were deep philosophies, for it took courage and confidence to ask questions. These descendants divined myths in what was really history, for true memories were forgotten in chaos as vast arrays of devastators used in the Great War ravaged the land. That war destroyed almost everything. It took centuries for India to regain its old cultural vigor and intellectual depth. When the recreated history of that great war was written, built through fragments of surviving information, the treatise was initially called Jaya or Victory. But even the unsophisticated minds of the descendants soon realized that this name was inappropriate. That dreadful war did not bring victory to anyone. Every single person who fought that war, lost their war. In fact, the whole of India lost. Today, we know the inherited tale of that war as one of the world's greatest epics. The Mahabharata. If the Lord Nilkantha allows it, the unadulterated story of that terrible war shall also be told one day. Om Namah Shivaya. The universe bows to Lord Shiva. I bow to Lord Shiva.